Yep, this is good. Whoa, that's scary. Good, because it's supposed to be scary. Question. What's the question? Don't you prefer making thumbnails on a device that gives you the experience of drawing on pencil and paper? Yeah, true. I do wish that I actually had a decent tablet to actually do my Photoshop work with, because especially when you're trying to brush and erase very small things, gotta be honest, this mouse isn't really cutting it. It's not good enough. So why not get an iPad and do it on the iPad? Yeah, it's true, Apple makes the best tablets, but unfortunately that's not saying much. What are you saying? I gotta be honest, tablets suck! What do you mean? Apple makes the best tablets out there. Yeah, including the iPads, except for their budget tier ones. The budget tier ones are basically the only iPads that make sense. Anything that's made to do more professional grade stuff, tablets suck for that. Even for Photoshop. All right, would you care to explain in further detail? Sure, let's begin. So as you may have just watched in that skit, you might realize that my thoughts on iPads have been very conflicting with each other, and that's because, yeah, technically they are the best tablets out in the market, except unfortunately, I can't really say that this is even that great of a tablet, despite that it's among the best of the best. And reviewing this thing is going to be really weird and difficult for me because it's very conflicting. There are so many aspects of this thing that are great, but there are also just way too many aspects that need improvement, and it just gets me all weirded out. So with this issue in mind, I guess I'm going to attempt to figure out how exactly I should review the iPad Air 5. To start things off, of course, we're going to start off with the design, and from a design perspective, actually, this thing is really great in terms of design. I'm absolutely loving this all-screen display, and more on that in a minute. Having it all-screen on a tablet like this really makes it feel like the display is actually taking advantage of the tablet form factor. The bezels are still a little thick in my opinion. I don't think the bezels should be this thick, especially in today's day and age. It was fine back in 2018, but you know, I think it's time Apple starts thinning out the bezels on their devices. Yeah, technically the display occupying this exact same form factor as the iPad Pros from 2018, it is technically housing a 0.1 inch diagonally smaller display compared to the 2018 iPad Pro. But for the most part, I've held the two side by side, and the bezels aren't actually that noticeably different. But either way, they're still a little thicker than I would prefer. So yeah, Apple, I think it's time to update your bezel thickness on the iPad. It could be thinned out a little bit. And that's pretty much what I can discuss about the front. The rest are all the sides and the back. And well, I guess starting on the sides, we got the power button with Touch ID right there, which I'm sorry guys, we should be done with Touch ID. I say this time and time again, and why? This really affects me, and not just me, but many other people out there. Not everybody has a fingerprint, but I don't know somebody that doesn't have a face. This thing, like the iPad Pros, should have Face ID. Why is that not on this iPad? To me, Face ID being exclusive to iPad Pro makes absolutely no sense. You can get it on an iPhone as cheap as $600 if you go brand new, or you could even get it cheaper for certified refurbished, because Face ID iPhones, they've been around for a while, and the truth is, same with iPads. So you can get Face ID on a $600 iPhone brand new from Apple, or cheaper if you go refurbished or find some other deals and discounts. But this $600 device doesn't even have Face ID? Why, Apple? And I say this because, yes, Touch ID does actually affect my ability to use this. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And that's because I have a skin condition called eczema, which for some reason, I don't understand Apple's marketing, because Apple's marketing is supposed to be geared towards anti-discrimination. But yet when you really take a look at the products and the features they're coming out with, they're being very discriminatory. For example, the security biometrics are now discriminating against people who don't have fingerprints or reliable fingerprints. That includes me. Anywho, that rant aside, yeah, this thing should have Face ID. Why do we have Touch ID in this power button thing? It doesn't work that well. Then turning towards other aspects on the side, we've got the volume buttons here, which one thing that absolutely drives me nuts nuts is, unfortunately, I'm trying to find a setting to change this. I don't know if one exists or not, but I've been digging through the settings to try to get the volume buttons to not swap. Every single time you flip it from portrait to landscape, what used to be the volume up button now becomes the volume down button. And so the volume down button then becomes the volume up button. And once you rotate it back, then it flips back like that. It may be ergonomic for some or more understandable, but to me, if you're going to have two buttons that control the volume, those two buttons should not switch like that. And that's because, okay, when I'm holding it this way, I'm assuming this top button here is the volume up button, so that means this will raise the volume, that will lower it. So to me, that should stay fixed in place. So even if I rotate it to the side, I still know that this is the top of the iPad, despite that I have it rotated on its side. Therefore, I would think that the volume button here, closest towards the top of the iPad, this button should raise the volume and the other one should lower it. But no, they swap it, and it gets me every single time I try to change the volume on this thing. Guys, I'm actually turning to you for this. Is there a setting to actually get the volume buttons to stay locked to their function and they don't swap every time you rotate the device? Is there a setting to change that? Please. Other than that, the rest of the stuff on the side, you got your little magnetic clip if you have an Apple Pencil, which I do, and actually that is the best way to integrate the Apple Pencil. It's how you connect it to the iPad, and that's how you charge it, and to me, makes sense. It's just a quick snap on or pull off, just like that. Then coming to the bottom of the device, we've got our speakers along with our USB-C port, which I absolutely love. I believe this is a 10 gigabit per second USB-C port, which I don't really do data transfer through this, and that's because genuinely I don't do much with this iPad, as I discovered. But because this thing has the M1 chip in it, I guess you get a 10 gigabit per second USB-C port because, well, they gotta reserve something for the iPad Pros. That's where the Thunderbolt port's found. And then the back design, we got the smart connector, which has never gotten used once by me because why is this thing only good for keyboards? I think you'd be able to come up with many more accessories aside from just keyboards that could use the smart connector, but I guess Apple begs to differ. And then of course you got the camera and a microphone hole, and to my surprise, no flash. Not only do the iPad Pros have a flash, I mean, okay, they're iPad Pros, they better have a flash, but the iPad Mini also has a flash. So if this thing was refreshed after the iPad Mini, why does this thing not have a flash on it? To me, that's just weird. Blue color's nice, not gonna lie. I mean, you know my favorite color. As long as there's a blue version of any Apple product, that's the one I'm gonna buy. So it's basically gonna cover the exterior design and all that. I mean, we could talk about some other things like the display. Display's fine. It's nothing special at all. And as I'm trying to unlock this thing so that way you guys can see it, Touch ID is not working. The display is fine. 10.9-inch LCD, Liquid Retina, whatever Apple brands it, it's perfectly fine. I mean, it's nothing really special. LCD panel, 60 hertz. Well, I guess I could mention that it's laminated because for some reason the budget tier iPad still doesn't have a laminated display. Why? So yeah, I guess it has that going for it because evidently lamination is not on all iPads. I don't understand why that's the case. Then the rest of the hardware aspects, I mean, this thing has an M1 chip. I've tried to take advantage of it, except evidently I discovered some major issues with this M1 chip. More on that in a little bit. But yeah, M1 chip. Battery life is okay, I guess. It's 10 hours supposedly, though I actually find myself draining it quicker than that, which to me doesn't make sense. Then really the last hardware thing I guess to talk about is just the cameras. Rear camera is okay, I guess. I mean, it does 4K at 60 and powered by an M1 chip, so it shouldn't have that many issues recording. And well, I guess it's got a nice big fat microphone that faces you, so okay. Rear camera seems to be okay. Front camera, nah, not so much. It's really fuzzy. This is an HD 60 clip because the front camera can only do HD 60, and I'm sorry, I look like a fuzzy mess as I'm looking at the viewfinder on this iPad. It doesn't look good. But hey, the front camera's got center stage. That's cool. I've never used it because sadly nobody ever calls me anymore. And I guess at this point, alright, there's not really much left to talk about the hardware because it's been solid for such a long time and Apple's just been trickling it down into the cheaper iPads like the iPad Air here. So yeah, of course, the hardware's solid. It's hard to get excited about that because it's been solid for such a long time now. The real frustration with this device has actually been in the software. And believe it or not, the software has actually caused the hardware on this thing to run incorrectly every now and again. I talked about feeling like I'm getting less battery life than 10 hours, and that's because, to my surprise, the way that iPadOS runs on an M1 chip, and this is the weird thing, you'd expect that the M1 being in all of our MacBooks, like for example, my MacBook Pro that I'm editing this video on, is powered by the M1 Pro chip. And that chip is absolutely insane. It's insanely powerful and also insanely power efficient. And the M1, which is what it's based off of, was also insanely powerful and insanely efficient, especially for the class that chip was competing in. So you think it being able to run a desktop operating system, like it's basically been given a cheat sheet and it's able to do everything so smoothly because it actually has an extreme high IQ or something. Unfortunately, when it's running iPadOS, I've discovered that it's really not running anything all that smoothly on this device. Short, very bursty tasks like, I don't know, let's say auto rotate. Here we are in portrait. Boom, we're rotated. Although that was a little slower than I expected. Okay, yep, we're figuring out. Oh, okay, yeah, we're sort of figuring out the rotating business here. I'm actually a bit surprised that it's lagging that much. I thought it was much quicker. I've seen iPads rotate much faster than that. Anywho, aside from that, short bursty tasks usually, the M1 chip is fine. It's when you get into a little more intensive stuff. That's actually when things start to go very wrong, very fast. In my experience, this might not be the case with all of you guys out there, but in my experience, the M1 chip, when you do anything that requires a little more processing power, it gets hot. And to me, this makes no sense because in an M1 MacBook Air that doesn't even have a fan, and yeah, okay, it's a little larger, it has a little bit more mass, you'd think that a chip that's able to run a desktop operating system and barely even get warm, you'd think that that same chip can run a lighter operating system because from the sounds of it, this operating system, iPadOS, is way less advanced than macOS. So you'd think it running iPadOS, which is less advanced than macOS, you'd think that it would run even more efficiently and there wouldn't be any issues with performance or thermals or anything like that. No, anytime that you do anything that's not short and bursty, this thing gets warm and you actually do start to notice it downgrade its performance. And I noticed this happening in, honestly, even in the simplest apps and games. Like, I'm not much of a gamer. The types of games that I play are typically puzzle games, like Flow Free. It's a classic. And no, it's not special. It's not intensive. But playing a few rounds of Flow Free, that is enough to heat up the iPad, and it does drop frames and it does stutter on the occasion, which to me doesn't make sense. This is, well, now the second most powerful chip that you can get in an iPad because iPad Pros now have M2 in it. But still, this thing has the second most powerful chip you can get in any iPad, you know, any tablet for that matter. And yet it can't handle a few rounds of Flow Free without overheating. And it's not just freezing up in the app. After I immediately close the app, it actually takes a second for the operating system to catch up because the chip's overheating, therefore it has to throttle its performance back. And this is just the weirdest thing I've experienced. I don't understand why it's doing this. And then of course, when you take a look at the rest of iPadOS, it's just a disappointment. Technically, it functions fine, but I have to be honest, I actually think that Android handles a few UI things better than the iPad. Split screen multitasking, for example, I think it's actually simpler on an Android tablet. I'm gonna say that right here. I used to own an Android tablet. If you watch the Random Alpha, my original channel, back in the early days, you might remember seeing my old Android tablets, a Samsung Galaxy Tab A. And you know what? I think that thing handled multitasking better than this thing does. Despite that, this has more RAM and a much more powerful CPU. And the reason why? It's software layout. It's not all that difficult to actually activate multitasking. In fact, all you had to do was hold the recent apps button and boom, multitasking was engaged. You could go through your recent apps or go to the home screen and select whatever app you wanted to quickly split screen and all that. Compared to this thing, Apple decided, okay, let's put some dots in the corner and do that all of a sudden. But yet now just trying to activate split screen multitasking, I think it's actually clunkier on the iPad than Android. And yes, split screen multitasking is something I do very frequently on a tablet because unlike my iPhone or any other smartphone, it doesn't have to be an iPhone, you have more screen real estate to work with. So sometimes I like to watch a YouTube video, so I'll blow that up on, well, basically the entire screen. Let's say I get a Twitter notification and want to check that real quick. Here's an example. Let's pretend a YouTube video is playing right now. So now I have to swipe up midway. Notice Twitter's not in the dock, so I have to go to the app library. Then I have to search for it in here. Where? Oh, right. It's X now all of a sudden. Really, Elon? Okay, now we got X because Twitter rebranded to X, evidently. Now I got it dragged around. Oh, okay, there we go. Now I can browse Twitter or check up on that as I'm watching the rest of my YouTube video over here on the big screen. And if there's an exciting moment, okay, swipe home. Boom. I can see the video in the exciting moment. And once it gets dull and boring, swipe back out. I can browse Twitter again, just like that. Or, excuse me, X. So dumb, Elon. So yeah, genuinely, I find split screen multitasking even clunkier. And yes, before you ask, I have tried Stage Manager. This is one of the few iPads that supports Stage Manager, and I gotta be honest, it's not good. It is really bad. Supposedly, they have made improvements for iPadOS 17. Maybe you might say I should reserve my judgment for that, but I'm sorry. It is so bad. It is so terrible. I actually thought it made the most sense on the iPad because unlike the Mac really doesn't need it, but the iPad did need something like that. Unfortunately, they did such a poor job implementing it. I'm sorry, I can't use it. It is terrible. So yeah, multitasking on the iPad, it just doesn't happen because it's clunky. And then also considering that this is an expensive iPad, like at retail, this is $600. I paid $500 for it because there was a sale going on at Target. But you'd think this expensive of a tablet with this amazing hardware, like it's got an M1 chip in it, you'd think it'd be able to do some professional grade apps, right? You'd think that this iPad will be able to do professional grade stuff, right? Well, you guys might recall a few videos ago, I uploaded my review of Final Cut Pro for the iPad that just came out, and it is not good. Seriously, it is not good. Apple, you need to improve on it like a lot. That, and also if you take a look at all the other professional grade apps like Swift Playgrounds, again, it's not the real Xcode. I haven't even tried it, but I've had to just look at the marketing material for it, and yeah, it's not a professional grade app, especially when to submit your app, you have to go back to the Mac and go to Xcode to submit it. So what's the point of Swift Playgrounds in the first place? I actually have yet to try Logic on this thing, and that's primarily because I don't have the time. Recording music takes a lot longer than it does to film and edit a video. And that's because when it comes to music and sound, especially me being the audiophile, it takes quite a while and many redos to actually get the proper sound experience that I want to create. So because of that, I haven't had any time to test Logic on this, but due to my experience with Final Cut, I am going to assume Logic is basically nerfed just like Final Cut on the iPad. That, and I have no clue how I'm supposed to connect my keyboard and my mixer to this thing, especially when you only got one Type-C port that's 10 gigabit. So I'm not even too sure how I'm supposed to connect all my peripherals anyways. So professional grade stuff, it's just not there. Now, technically, this could be your only computer if you're using it for the basics. I say this because it's got all the word processing apps you could ever want, be it the Microsoft Office, the G Suite, or actually Apple Pages, Numbers, and Keynote do just fine. You file your taxes online, this can also do that, but genuinely, if you really do anything professional, I don't think this is going to be the device. And even if you wanted to say do things as a hobby, like maybe you don't want making YouTube videos to be your professional job, unlike me. So maybe it would work if you're just a hobbyist? Maybe? But that's a really weak maybe, if I'm being honest. I think if you're a hobbyist, you want to actually get into actually decent equipment, and I can't really say that this is decent equipment, especially when Final Cut isn't as optimized on this thing, because when you actually run Final Cut on this, again, the M1 chip can't handle applications on iPadOS without overheating and such. So because of that, Final Cut crashes a lot, and when it does, it varies quite often as of what changes it saves and what changes it doesn't. So yeah, it's fun editing videos if you're a hobbyist on this thing. And actually, as I discovered as well, Photoshop is actually nerfed on this thing, which to me makes no sense because you'd think having this amazing stylus, which actually a lot of artists, this is their stylus of choice, especially when it comes to a stylus for the iPad, you'd think Photoshop would be really advanced because this is going to be the closest you can get to pencil and paper, but on digital. And yet, it's nerfed! What? And not to mention, I actually have performance issues with Photoshop on this. I actually use this iPad to make every single thumbnail ever since I bought it. But I have to be honest, I'm not impressed with the performance of it even, because once I create my text title, I cannot touch the image. Otherwise, it will start leaving text artifacts in weird random places all over my thumbnails, and it absolutely ruins it to the point where I have to go back to home and delete the whole project I was just working on and start from scratch all over again. Now, I don't know if that's Apple's fault with their terrible optimization for the M1 chip, because seriously, why is it overheating? Even Photoshop will get this thing to heat up real bad. So I don't know if it's Apple's optimization with the M1 chip or if it's Adobe to blame, because we all know Adobe actually is not the best in terms of optimization and stability and all that. Though I'm starting to lean more on more of the idea that it's Apple's M1 not being as optimized to run this application, because I've had many Photoshop updates come through this and the issue has not been fixed. And so as a result, this thing is just weird for me to describe a review. On one hand of the surface facts, this doesn't really seem that great. This should not be $500 if genuinely you can't take advantage of the hardware that it's got, because one, the professional grade apps is just not there in the first place, but also even if they were there, the M1 is overheating in this thing. Like, bad. In fact, it once overheated itself enough to the point where it shut itself down. I kid you not, this thing got hot enough to the point where it turned itself off, full power off, because it couldn't take the heat. And actually, that was me playing my Flow Free game, which is actually an extremely light game. I've played that game on so many other devices, including phones and other tablets, and they've never had any overheating issues. Even my Android tablet, my iPad 4. Speaking of which, where is it? This was the iPad I was using before, and I used to play Flow Free on this thing, and never once has the application overheated on this, despite that this is actually a much weaker chip in it. I don't remember what chip's in this thing, but whatever chip it is in this thing, it's only good enough to run iOS 10.3.3 or something like that. But again, I have no overheating issues playing Flow Free on this iPad, and yet somehow this much more powerful iPad Air 5 with an M1 chip in it, a laptop grade processor, somehow that thing can't run without overheating issues. To me, that's pointing to optimization errors, and this is the weird thing, because Apple is famous for optimization. That is the one thing that they've been known for years. What is the number one reason Apple can get away with putting less RAM in all of their devices and also get some of the best performance out there? Optimization. This is what they've nailed. This is something that Microsoft can never nail with Windows, because Windows has to run on a wide range of best hardware to the crappiest pieces of you can get your hands on. And even Android's a bit of the same way. It's hard to optimize Android to run on every single device. Now, somehow, despite that Android has to be able to run on many different hardware configurations, it does a better job optimizing than Microsoft. That's why I call out Windows way more than Android. But Apple has still always been able to beat Android out in terms of performance, because Apple has that optimization. They've been doing it for years. That's how they get away with Apple cheaps down the specs on the devices. Android does the pics, got more RAM. We get more gigabytes of RAM. Apple has famously gotten away with it because they optimize the system to actually not require as much. My MacBook Pro, which I do intensive stuff on, only has 16 gigs of RAM, and it's never been an issue for me. I get absolutely no slowdowns except for that one Final Cut update that I got that actually kind of made the whole software a little buggy and such. Though they fixed it, Apple caught on quick and they fixed it fast. So this absolutely confuses me so much. Apple, the company being famous for, you don't need the best hardware, you just need the optimization. Well, to me, this feels like they've taken the Android approach, because they put in way more hardware than what this iPad really needs to do the type of stuff that this thing is typically doing, and it's not optimized. It's overheating when you're playing simple games. Like, I'm not even playing all of those first-person shooter games that people like to Flight. Ugh, I hate those games so much. I don't play stuff like that. I don't play CPU or GPU intensive games like that. And yet this thing is overheating on the most simplest games, and also during various other tasks that you'd think that it should be a breeze on this thing. If it's a breeze on the MacBooks, it should be a breeze on this thing too. But that optimization is just not there. I don't see it. So to me, this kind of feels more like an Android product, which that's weird. So why haven't I returned this thing, or why haven't I sold this yet? Because yeah, this is not exactly good review painting this in light, where the hardware is great, but the software just is not there. So why do I still use this thing? Sadly, it's because I'm using it for the little things that it does, and I genuinely wish I could have paid less money for this, because the types of stuff that I'm using this for, watching videos, general content consumption, I don't typically use this device for that. In fact, this rarely gets used, and the only time I pretty much use it a lot is Photoshop for making thumbnails. That's it. Sometimes if I need both monitors at my desk, it'll play the YouTube video in the background, which, okay, it keeps me from getting bored entirely, but it's basically a content consumption device, a Photoshop tool, and when I'm traveling, this is the one time that I always appreciate it the most. Sidecar. I love Sidecar way too much, and it's the number one reason why I really wanted to get an iPad for so long, because as I discovered Photoshop, I'm really better off just using Photoshop on the Mac, though. To admit, I've really been growing to like the Apple Pencil and such. I paid $100 for this Apple Pencil. I want to make use of it. And yes, this Apple Pencil was also on sale. But yeah, the number one time that this thing gets used, and I just can't fault it for, Sidecar. It's amazing. This thing makes a great secondary monitor. Would be even better if it was the 12.9-inch iPad Pro, but seriously, I'm not paying that type of money for an iPad. $1,100 for the base model? No, absolutely not. Even if that thing was on sale, it costs way too much. So yeah, it's really for just the few things, and I'm hardly even taking advantage of the iPad itself, which is a shame. So yeah, Apple, you need to improve iPadOS. The hardware is great, but somehow the software is not optimized to run on your own silicon, which makes no sense in my opinion. And for the most part, it's genuinely not all that useful. The only reason I bought it was because of this one use case that I don't even know how many people actually use it for that use case, because I guess most people prefer to just take their own laptops and not have to worry about secondary displays and all that, because oftentimes you'll work on a bench and you can't use a secondary display anyways. So yeah, this thing genuinely feels useless to me most of the time. I don't know why I still have this. I wish I could take more advantage of it. I wish I could do more with this, but unfortunately, Apple just doesn't think that this is a professional device. And despite that they claim that their iPad Pros are professional grade devices that can replace your computer, I can't say it can, because the things that it could replace computer-wise, genuinely all you need is the budget iPad. Don't go for this if you're doing all that. Save some money. Yeah, I wish I could use it more for other things, but Apple doesn't think this is a pro device. And yeah, this is the Air, so it's technically not supposed to be a professional grade device. But at $600 new, you should be able to do a little more than just the basics for $600. But instead, this just feels like extremely underutilized hardware, and that's genuinely such a shame. Apple, I really hope you start paying more attention to the iPad line, because the hardware not exactly needs that much more attention. It's the software. The software needs much more attention that you've been giving it. And genuinely, iPadOS 16 feels like iOS 15, because now features that have been on the iPhone for over a year come to iPads a year later. So why is there this discrepancy? You need to put more heart into iPadOS, Apple. This level of heartlessness that you give this thing genuinely makes this feel like completely underutilized hardware, and that's basically what's happening to this thing. Because the hardware is so underutilized, the device itself is going underutilized. And it's not just because I have an iPhone and I have a Mac, so therefore this thing shouldn't be necessary, especially because I've been using an iPhone and a Mac to do the majority of my stuff for years. It's just, man, having a secondary display is nice. Primary reason why I got this. But I don't even think you need an M1 chip to use this as a separate display. Hasn't Sidecar been out since iPadOS 13? So yeah, okay, no more rambling. Other than just Apple, this thing needs more love. Give it more love. It really needs it. All right, what are your thoughts on the iPad Air 5? As mine aren't exactly the nicest at the moment. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching. Do me a favor and interact with the stuff below. My name is DeWolf. Random Alpha, signing out.